Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second Chief Transformation Officer Summit and our first virtual summit for the Chief Transformation Officer and industry for the year. Welcome to 2021. I hope you're all feeling very energized and ready for another year, hopefully with less pandemic, but a little bit more productivity and a little bit more like striving to achieve goals and really get to the bottom of the challenges of your industry at this present time and just overcoming and combating those. And what better way to do that than to talk with your community and to talk with industry peers about their challenges as well and overcome them together in an environment such as this. So whilst we can't meet in person for these types of things, we can definitely still meet and discuss virtually. So I'm very excited to have you all here attending the event. And I just wanted to quickly go over some housekeeping things really quick so you're all aware. So throughout the presentations, you will have an opportunity to submit questions for our speakers to answer live. So if you do have a question, please make sure you put it in the Q&A box and then we can endeavour to answer them at the end. I'd also like to remind you all that these sessions are available on demand post-event. So if you do miss some, don't worry, you'll be able to access them again later. And at the end of each session this morning, please click back to the event timeline on your screen to access links to the next session, which is in the session timelines in the former screen before this one. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Wen Smallwood, who will be chairing our event today, and she will be leading a lot of the discussions with our speakers and introducing them. So Wen, I will hand the floor over to you to start the day.
And welcome to the CTO Summit. I had the privilege of being a part of the one 2 years ago, and I'm really looking forward to this format and seeing the conversations that flow in this virtual setting. It was really funny because as I was thinking about this session, I was thinking about the usual housekeeping conversation that you would have in the beginning. You know, you'd say, we'll have morning tea at 10:30. That'll be out in the breakout room or in the mezzanine level. And over lunch, we'll go to the main cafeteria and there'll be an area cordoned off for us. And here we are in this virtual setting where actually all of our breaks are going to be kind of silent. And there's no ability for us to actually interact with each other with physical cues and little micro gestures kind of tweaking that we're interested in a topic and we want to explore it further. So my thought is, I think we've spent a year now getting used to Zoom meetings and team meetings or WebEx, whichever you use, and our ability to be present, to use chat to show that engagement and just kind of bring up thought bubbles or reactions, I found really useful. And it helps the presenter because you actually get some feedback that you would normally get when you're looking at an audience. So my housekeeping is just don't be afraid to jot down anything, whether it's an emoji or a question or a thought that you want to explore during the presentations. So before I hand off and introduce Scott, I just wanted to say, first, that's my dog. So that's the one of those kind of memes of the things that happen when you're in Zoom. I have two little dogs that you may hear wanting to join the conversation throughout the day. I think we're at such a fascinating inflection point in history. And the changes to our society, to our community, to our families, much less to an organization, is profound. And I love the dialogue that's happening out on social media and other media around the choice that we have in how we actually embrace this and the kind of fork in the road in how we're going to start to develop further in a community, a society, and how we interact with each other. And one of the most public faces of that change and that disruption is the public sector. And I think that that is something that has been really fascinating for me to watch. And there are 2 points. Transformation, my talk 2 years ago about transformation as the CTO was that it's the new normal and that there is no CEO that comes in that doesn't want to disrupt the operating model and actually and leave a legacy that has changed the organization or the industry from when they started their role. And so there are very few organizations where they don't talk about change or transformation. But over the last year, we've been in this unique and privileged position to actually have the opportunity to look at what will become transformational, whether it's digital, whether it's culture, whether it's operating models, and usually all three. But now we're at this really interesting time where our economy has really survived much more robustly than a lot in the world, and we have the good fortune to actually think about what does this year look for us in the different industries we're in, as well as Australia as an economy. And luckily, we have presentations on both, whether it's transformations that people are embarking on, or how you reignite a paused or delayed transformation. So I'm looking forward to the next 2 days. I hope you enjoy it too. As I said, please don't be shy on going into chat, asking any questions, or posting any comments. So unless there are any questions that come up, I'm going to now go straight into it. Our first presentation is a mouthful, and we can all read it, but it's really around the Digital Transformation Agency, how it's supporting the crisis response in COVID, as well as the national economic recovery. I'm really interested in how the government's going to be doing that. We're really lucky to have Scott Cass-Dunbar joining us, who's the Chief Digital, I think it's a bit of a double-barreled, isn't it, Scott? It's the Chief Digital Investment and Strategy Officer. So looking forward to this conversation. We'll have about 30 minutes of presentation, then we'll have some time for Q&A. So over to you, Scott.
Thank you so much, Wen. Look, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you here today. Look, riding the wave of change, which I think is, again, the theme of this these couple of days. I think you're totally right, Wen. I think, really what we found from last year is it is the new normal. Change is constant. The degree of transformation that we need to drive going forward, absolutely important on so many different levels. Looking at the agenda of the next couple of days, I think you've got some great presentations coming from people from the ANZ Bank and from News Corp, and again, it's just it's a pleasure to be with you today. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on, wherever you may be today, and just pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. So my name's Scott Cass-Dunbar. I'm the Australian Government Chief Strategy Officer, and I'm from the Digital Transformation Agency here in Canberra. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Our objective in the DTA is to improve the user experience for all Australians who access government information and services. And we do this by leading the design, the development and continual enhancement of whole of government service delivery policies, standards, platforms and joined up services. To accelerate this digital transformation in government, we provide strategic leadership on whole of government and shared ICT and digital services. That includes areas like digital sourcing and capability development. We deliver policies and develop those standards, platforms for whole of government and shared ICT and digital service delivery. And we provide advice to agencies in government on ICT and digital investment proposals. You'll hear today that we've got a really broad kind of role that we play right the way across government. So what's my role inside the DTA? So I lead the overarching digital transformation strategy for the Australian government. So we're currently 2 years into that, and I'll talk a little bit about where we're taking the strategy going forward. I also lead a whole of government architecture, and again, you'll hear about the different lenses that we think through architecture that's definitely not just about digital and technology. Also lead the development of capabilities, so digital capability across government, thinking about what is it that we need in terms of skills and capabilities, both now and for the future, to really be able to drive and support that transformation. And then finally, whole of government digital investment. And that really does focus in on what have we actually invested in already, what are we having trained that we're developing right now, and what are our future investments. And as again you'll hear a little bit about today, a lot of this, it's all kind of intrinsically linked. So how investment actually supports the architecture and delivers the strategic outcomes. So today I really wanted to touch on kind of 5 areas. The first was around just reflections on 2020 and what we've kind of learned from that. The second piece is really around kind of where we're going and what we're kind of doing within government, and the role of digital transformation in that recovery. The third was around the evolving government architecture. What does that look like? Where are we going? And how does it support the sort of policy objectives? Then the next was around balancing kind of those macro level changes that we need to drive, but also thinking about some of those micro things that we need to put in place. And then final is around just digital investment, reuse and recycling. As Glenn mentioned, we've got about half an hour with a bit of time for questions. I think there is also a bit of a roundtable after this as well. So if you don't have questions right now, certainly can hold those back to later on. So reflections on 2020 and the role of the DTA in the COVID response. Look, I think 2020, again, we all would remark that it just was an incredibly challenging time. I think the pace of change, the twists and turns that we all faced, just incredible. And I don't think there was any way that at the start of 2020 we could ever have predicted what we would be facing. In Canberra, where I am, again, the start of the year last year over Christmas, we had incredible bushfires as was experienced around the country. I've never seen so much acrid smoke just hanging around for day after day. I think it, completely reinvigorated the whole market around air purifiers because it was almost impossible to actually purchase one. We also experienced incredible hailstorms. We had a hailstorm on one day which took out about 10,000 cars down here. And then we moved into COVID. Throughout all of these, there's been, again, completely different twists and turns which have driven those challenges. And for us in the Australian government, one of the primary aims has been making sure that through the digital channels that all people can really access the up-to-date and reliable information that they actually need to ensure that they can get what they need in the right time, in the right context. And that's been around making sure that people have the information to be able to protect themselves, their families, their friends and the Australian community. So through that, in the DTA, we've been working to develop a whole range of different digital tools to really best suit the needs of the community. I'll touch on a little bit later today, just around some of the techniques and mechanisms that we use to kind of design these digital tools to make sure that they're fit for purpose. But in 2020, we really worked at speed to design the tools to make things simpler, easier and faster for people across government. So some of the things in 2020 that we worked on was the COVID Safe contact tracing app that was designed to work with to help the states and territories and health authorities to really work with their own kind of manual contact tracing processes to bring all that together. The second was around the Coronavirus Australian Information app. And that was, again, putting information into people's pockets in terms of what is the most up-to-date information in terms of restrictions, case numbers, symptom checkers, clinic finders, so that people wherever they could go could actually get that information. Australia.gov.au was another area that we focused on. So that's the central kind of web channel for people to get to the information within government. And a lot of work was done to update the website to make sure that it really presented the right information at the right level, right time for people. That initial website was developed in around 24 hours to bring that up to speed to really get the information out there. And I think anybody who's kind of worked with government in the past would probably acknowledge that the government turning something around in 24 hours was incredibly rapid. That website has been updated regularly with latest announcements, and also part of what we found throughout COVID was largely people, when they interact with government, they don't differentiate between state and federal governments. Now, whilst there are clear delineations of responsibility between the different levels of government, making sure that the information that's being put out there is consistent. We found this in the bushfires along with COVID. So I guess, in kind of summary, what did we actually see last year? The need to move really, really fast to be able to get the right information out at the right time, and really to be able to provide the flexibility around the channels so that people could use the right channel that they preferred to access the information and make sure that that was consistent. So what has been the role, or what is the role of digital transformation in terms of recovery? Where is it going and what are we doing? You may have heard earlier this month, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, outlined his government's priorities for the year. In summary, at the high level, these are around suppressing the virus and delivering the vaccine, cementing the economic recovery for Australia, guaranteeing essential services, protecting Australia's interests globally, and caring for our country. So all of these priorities and outcomes required to deliver them really do underpin and drive the digital work that we're doing in 2021 to ensure we can achieve these objectives. And supporting these outcomes are a series of principles that we have where everything we do in digital should be helpful, simple, respectful, and transparent. If we take this back to the objectives that we had in the digital transformation strategy from 2 years ago, which were around being easy to deal with, informed by you, and fit for the digital age, again, these principles certainly do align and support that. So again, we've got the overarching policy outcomes, and then we've got these principles that sit behind that. So how does everything hang together in the DTA to help deliver this digital transformation? So our kind of core mission within the DTA, it is about delivering and improving those digital services for citizens to help make them simple, clear and fast. We're committed to improving people's experience of government services. So this means improving also the skills that we need within government to be able to deliver these services. I mentioned we've got a whole range of policy objectives that we look to deliver at this top level, but supporting that we have the overarching digital transformation strategy. So again, mentioned that sort of sits in my area, and that does provide the light on the hill for everything that we do. As I mentioned, we're 2 years into the strategy right now, and we're looking at doing a bit of a refresh, and I'll talk about some of the consultation a little bit later that we've done with the market. Underneath the strategy, we have the architecture. The architecture is not simply looking at just technology tools and widgets and how they hang together. The architecture looks at a whole range of lenses, including people, process, technology, policy, legislation, and all of those levers provide us opportunities to be able to shape the way that we're able to transform and do things better. The focus on capability is absolutely important. Making sure that we have the right skills and we have the right capabilities for the future. And so the way that we're thinking about, again, in terms of architecture and that people component is what are those capabilities that we have right now, what is changing, what is evolving, and what do we need. Then thinking about what we decide to build internally within the APS, what we decide to buy in or borrow from the market to make sure that we've got a really complete view of the capability. Underpinning the strategy, the architecture and the capability, we've got a whole series of platforms and services that the DTA are involved with, and that's where platforms and services can be really established on a whole of government level. And a great example of that is digital identity. We've now got around 2 million people which are using digital identity live in every day to actually access government services. One of the concepts around digital identity is making sure that it can be leveraged not only by the federal government, but also states, territories, and also ultimately the private sector. So with digital identity, the concept is being able to prove your identity once and not have to provide that information time and time again as you access those services. That becomes, again, a building block for how that we're able to sort of transform services end to end by building out those components. Also within the DTA, it is about informing that investment layer within government. So thinking about all of the major digital and ICT investment that not only is underway right now or in the future, but also thinking about what's already been previously invested in. So in my area inside the DTA, we look at every major proposal that comes through government. We go back and we look at through procurements, what has been procured, previous initiatives in terms of what they've delivered, and we break it down and we look for synergies and opportunities for potential reuse or ways that we can accelerate that transformation by making sure that we're not doing the same thing time and time again. How do we actually make sure that we get the most out of each of those investments? And as I mentioned, that flows up into the architecture all the way through to the policy objectives. We have a whole range of other sub-strategies, including hosting strategies, secure cloud strategies, and all of these again come together to kind of support that holistic picture of governance. The digital sourcing work that we also run inside the DTA, incredibly important in helping the government be able to procure and source what they need digitally, quickly, easily, and taking those barriers around where there may need to be duplication between the different government department and agencies. And then finally, also in the DTA, it is about making sure that we're able to provide good governance across the entire estate and the entire enterprise to really think about what is going on, what is the impact of one decision over another, how does that work in terms of timeframes, scheduling, to make sure everything lines up in a way that we have a really coherent view across government. So that's kind of the DTA and many of the components inside it and how it kind of works. So capability, I mentioned that what we do inside the DTA, it's not just about tech. It is about building out those kind of the skills and capabilities that we need for the future. Another role within the DTA is leading the development of the digital profession within the public sector. At the moment, we've got 3 professions that have been stood up within government. One is digital, the second is around data, and the third is around human resources, so HR. We work very closely with the other professions to make sure that, again, we're not duplicating and we are kind of driving synergies between the 3, but they are quite unique in many different ways. So inside the DTA, we, as mentioned, own the digital profession. That was launched in April 2020, and it really has a focus on building those digital leadership skills to drive transformation, developing career pathways to support practitioners to become professionals, young people to enter the APS, and public servants to re-skill into those digital roles that we need for the future. Providing those kind of learning and professional opportunities and defining standards for the digital professions. All of, again, having the right capability and skills inside government helps accelerate and drive that transformation in terms of the outcomes that we produce. One of the things that we are focused on at the moment is thinking about mobility across the APS and how do we give people very rich experiences throughout their career where they can go and play in completely different areas, experience new things, and bring those experiences back across the APS. And that really allows us to share sort of better practice across the APS, and also broadening the ways that we also attract and share digital talent within the APS. So again, this is like a real key enabler for both better services, innovation, and also the economic impact of what we do. Everything that we do inside the DTA really does flow through into how we're able to drive and support those policy objectives, and including how we're able to help stimulate the economy. So it's making sure that what we're doing has got a direct line of flow in terms of what the impact and outcome is from the work that we do. Now, we don't do that in isolation. We make sure that we have a lot of engagement with the states and territories within Australia, but also internationally. So in recent times, we've been engaging with countries like Singapore, Canada, the USA, the UK, New Zealand, all the way through to countries like Honduras. And it's really interesting, I think, that when we do engage globally, we actually see that there are so many synergies in terms of where the countries are going digitally, the same sort of objectives in terms of what is required for transformation, and many of the same sort of problems and issues that we kind of face that we have to work through together to kind of get there. And I guess that gives us kind of some comfort as well that we're not doing this alone, and many of those objectives are actually quite aligned. So I mentioned digital transformation strategy. That is what kind of overpins or underpins or sits over everything that we do in terms of providing that light on the hill or direction for what we do within government. We've said it's been around for 2 years now, but we've also said that we aspire to be a top 3 digital government in the world by 2025. That still stands. The strategy is accompanied by a roadmap that contains around 100 initiatives in it. Many of those have now been developed. But it is showing just how many and how broad the kind of work is within government that we have ongoing to support those objectives. Late last year, we decided, as we're thinking about the impact of 2020, just what is it that we need to do in terms of is the strategy relevant? Where is it actually going? And what might we need to just think about in terms of considering if we were to do a refresh? What we did is we went out to market, and when we went to market, we went out to, by market I mean the whole of Australia. So we asked citizens We asked academia, we asked industry, we asked other governments, we asked states and territories to really come back and think about what are the areas of focus around transformation and strategy going forward that we need to think about. Now, many of those things were already kind of embedded within the strategy and the architecture, but the themes that really came back were around things like strategic data usage, data sovereignty, digital skills, collaborating with our partners. Cybersecurity certainly came through as a major area of focus. Ethics and privacy, and again, as we think about the use of new and emerging technologies, what that actually looks like. Making sure that we do take a whole of government approach so that it does become very joined up. And again, that is core to the mission inside the DTA. Thinking about digital inclusion, so as we design services for all citizens, making sure that we're not excluding people that may have specific requirements to be able to access the channels of their choice. And bringing all that together. So I think in terms of what we heard from the market, it did mirror kind of the direction we were going in, but it did give us a lot of kind of focus points in terms of where we're really drilling into as we think about where the transformation strategy goes. Again, the original strategy being around easy to deal with, fit for purpose and fit for the digital age, still kind of applies. But again, those principles around making things helpful, transparent, respectful, and also easy to use are really, really important. So bringing all that together at the top layer is what brings together kind of that frame around then how do we leverage our people, process, policy and technology to be able to deliver those outcomes. So we obviously in the government, we recognise that we are spending public money. So there has to be a very strong fiscal responsibility with all investments that we make. So again, the DTA is very much around being able to drive that consistent investment so we don't duplicate and make sure that we get the most out of every dollar that we actually decide to invest in. So having that whole of the state view of not only the strategic level, but down at the architecture level is really, really important to bring that all together. So I mentioned at the start also that, again, the way that we design these services, it really needs to be grounded in real life experiences that we hear from citizens. So this is not about us kind of having teams that kind of sit in. We've got great sort of collaboration spaces and transformation centers where we can kind of go through and look at problems. A lot of the work that we do is about getting out there and talking to individual citizens, to communities to really find out what are their pain points, what do they need. What we found is that as we go through government services, there largely is around 10 pain points which kind of are identified that are pretty common to most of our services. And some of those relate to things like finding a single source of truth. Mentioned in 2020, again with the applications and also with australia.gov.au, was really critical to be able to bring that information together. Things around uncertainty around what you're entitled to and then what your obligations might actually be with the service. So again, building that into the way that we do service design and making sure that's really user-centered is really critical. Other things around complexity of tools. Government is large. We have a large number of agencies. So how do we bring those tools together? And we're doing a lot of work in the DTA at the moment around things like MyGov as an entry point within government, and how do we present the information to the individual at the right time, rather than the individual having to then go and navigate and kind of work out where to go and which tools to access within government. And you'll see that there's a beta up on the MyGov site at the moment. And also just thinking about how long does it actually take to do something? Again, if I'm dropping somebody off to school in the morning, I know I've got like kind of 10 minutes spare. It's really helpful just to know that if I interact with government to do a service, how long is it going to take? If I've got 10 minutes spare, I'll do it now. If I know it's going to take 10 minutes, if it might take 20 minutes, maybe I'll come back and do it later when it's more convenient for me. So a couple of other things I just wanted to touch on before we kind of close. The architecture I mentioned up top. The architecture is incredibly important to really think about all of those frames around people, process, technology and legislation, and how we have something that drives a meaningful, consistent approach within government. It's not about just building big frameworks and putting them on the shelf. It's actually about taking real projects and applying it through the architecture to work out where those synergies sit. One of the things that we're looking at the moment is the development of a platforms catalogue, where we really think about what are those capabilities within government, what are the common capabilities, how do we describe them, what do we already have in place, where might we have some gaps that we need to invest in, what do we need to, again, delivering those outcomes, how do we stack this all up and bring it together. What we've been doing a lot recently is working with not only big agencies but like small agencies within government, just to find out what is going to work for them in terms of an architecture. In many cases the large agencies have a very, very strong capability, so how do we help the small to medium agencies leverage those capabilities and bring it together right the way across government? By doing that, it really does give us the ability to think about more of those, what are some of those macro things that we need to do to drive transformation for the long term, but then what are some of those micro things that we need to put in place just to improve the experience now, to remove choke points or to remove some of those some of the pain points that I mentioned earlier. Other things that we've got going on inside the DTA which kind of really do support transformation is we're just embarking on doing a digital review at the moment. The genesis of this was out of the THODI review, Delivering for All Australians, in 2019, where there was a recommendation around doing a broad baseline through an ICT audit. Now, what that gives us is it gives us a good kind of current baseline of the current landscape within digital services and technology. And again, then making those choices around where investments need to be made, where we decide to maybe retire some things, where we decide to build on what we've already invested on, to deliver those better kind of services and outcomes. So again, that review is going through at the moment, and that will give us a really, really good view. So the final thing I kind of wanted to touch on, because I think we are sort of coming up to time, is just thinking about, again, that balance between getting the mix right. We have so much going on inside government at any one time. The number of initiatives that are underway, there are large, there are big, there are small, there are ones that are very, very technically orientated. There are others that really kind of look at, it might be around the process improvement, or it might be around building that more sustainable capability. In the DTA, the role is to really be able to bring all of those into like an enterprise view, so we can make sense of everything that's going on and what that actually means for us. So again, driving those decisions around being able to reuse, recycle, build new things without that kind of complete view, and the digital, again, review kind of supports this as well. We need to have that visibility. So we track everything that's kind of going on within government at the moment. We make sure that we've got strong visibility of what people are thinking about, right from the genesis of the early concept or idea, bringing together different people across government that might have similar kind of needs that are only at the really early concept stage, all the way through to programs that are in flight that may be able to stand up capabilities for the leverage of other people. In the DTA, it's an incredible massive program of work. It's a great opportunity to be able to transform the future and bring everything together. We've got so much going on that's it's right at the centre of what we do within government. Incredibly exciting. And again, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Happy to take any questions, and again, maybe catch up during the roundtable a little bit later on. Thanks so much, guys.
It's always hard to start. I might start with one. First, I think that the way that the government handled the COVID crisis, especially being relatively quick, not taking an elimination strategy, but actually being really quick in its response. And though there are, there's the argy-bargy between states, I think that the world will say that the response by Australia has been relatively strong. You would have been kind of in the juggernaut of things happening with the crisis coming on, having to make rapid fire decisions and having to pivot on what you had in plan. Can you describe some of those and give us a little bit of insight into the things that you thought you had to change that maybe shifted through the year, or things that you really landed? For me, one that was really interesting was how the ServiceNow app has really kind of hit its stride and proliferated. It's so easy to kind of keep your contract trace. Is that right? Is that even the right phrasing? But And that you guys have done such a great job with that. Be really fascinated to hear about your journey in that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think it's been. I mean, it was so rapid within the early days, and again, just so many unknowns. For us, in terms of the overarching kind of delivery of services within government, the ability to get the right information out at the right time, as I mentioned, was critical, and make sure that was consistent. Now that was changing really, really quickly all the way through 2020. So staying on top of that was critical, but also being able to make sure that we maintained, as different assistance packages were being provided to people across the economy. That drove an increase in the need for service delivery through face-to-face channels and telephony channels as well as digital, and within government, you don't have the ability to be able to. You need to be able to keep the focus on being able to meet their needs, and a lot of that is driven by our ability to be able to understand and have visibility of all of the moving parts, so that when we make a decision that we're going to do something over here, what is the impact all the way through to the citizen? The thing I would say in 2020, we didn't have the luxury of. We do some really good detailed user-centric design in terms of life journey mapping, going through and looking at pain points, looking at opportunities. And when you're right in the middle of everything, you need to be able to respond based on the best information that you have available at that time. We've been doing a lot of work over 2020, though, looking at things like responding to a natural disaster, thinking about the bushfires of early last year, and building that out and making sure that we've got a really good, structured, evidence-based approach to that kind of life journey, in terms of if somebody had gone through a natural disaster before, what is their experience, as opposed to if they hadn't. So I guess it's also for us, it's been keeping the balance on making sure we get that immediate response out as required, but also making sure that we kind of also focus in that longer term transformation. So 2020 was not an opportunity for us to kind of just stop and pause and forget about all of the other things that we have going on in government. Getting that balance right is really important.
Awesome, and really rings true to any transformation that I've been involved in. One of the things that I find is sometimes the government's seen as being really slow, but in moments of crisis, a lot of times, and in kind of innovation and adoption of new tech or new policies or new ways of working, sometimes government can really be cutting edge or leading edge. Are there any words of wisdom you have in what you learned where you see that actually in the public sector you're doing really well and actually leading the curve, that you would give as advice to the private sector on things that they need to change or tactical changes they can make?
I think, and it's interesting, I think in the digital transformation agency, that we quite often, there's a view, I think, just in terms of even our title, that it comes down to this focus on widgets and technology and how we kind of leverage new and emerging. I think one of the things that I found through 2020, which was a real challenge but was a real opportunity, was again that content curation, content development, of making sure that that can be consumable for the right purpose and right context for the right people. Again, you can have, I think, the best technology and platforms kind of underpinning the way that you deliver the services, and we're always kind of updating and doing new things with that. But so much of the business of government is around information, making sure that the right advice is being provided at the right time, making sure that people can access the services through the channels of their choice. And what kind of sits behind what might be on an application or might be on the website, most citizens don't really care about. And I think sometimes in government we can focus more in on that tech rather than the outcome. I would say the biggest thing, and it's probably also for the private sector, 2020 has showed how important those outcomes actually are, and keeping a focus on everything that we do, delivering towards that common outcome. I saw so many agencies just working so closely together because we had such a common purpose, and we do have a common purpose now in terms of our policy objectives. So I don't think there's a magic kind of piece of technology which just completely changed the whole game. It really is the sum of all of those parts coming together.
Scott, are there any other questions from the audience? We've got about 30 seconds. No? If not, then virtual round of applause for Scott. Thank you for sharing your insights. Really, looking forward to hearing you speak further in the panel that's coming up in a few minutes.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So, Isaac, do I hand back to you now, or do I just plot on?
Yeah, so what we'll do now, everybody, is we will all jump into the next room where we will move on to the panel discussion. So if everyone jumps out of this one and goes into the next one, that will work.
See you guys soon.
You all there?